November 27, 1968, Thanksgiving Day. At Firebase Sierra, in the central highlands of Vietnam, Specialist 4 Robert Cizone looked out through the open door of the UH-1 Huey helicopter and saw red lines of tracer bullets cutting through the morning mist. His M60 machine gun hung from bungee cords, the durals still warm from the last mission. He was only 23 years old and had been in the country for just 2 months, but he had already learned what training never taught him. When you fly in a helicopter 1,500 feet above the enemy jungle, there is no place to hide. There is no cover, no concealment. Only the open door, the loud wind, and the enemy below, aiming their guns up at you. The math of survival was harsh. More than 10% of all Vietnam War deaths were helicopter crew members. Out of 6,175 Americans killed in helicopter missions, 2,774 were air crew, and the door gunners had the highest death rate of all. They sat in open doors, fully exposed, holding 30-pound machine guns, trying to stop enemy fire while their aircraft hovered at its most dangerous time, the landing. What none of them knew in those first missions was that they were not only fighting an enemy, they were also fighting physics, battle tactics, and a hard truth about helicopter war that took years to understand. The door gunner job was never made to be safe, it was made to be effective. And being effective in war often means someone must sacrifice. To see why door gunners rarely survived Vietnam, we have to start not in the jungle, but in how the Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopter was built. When the U.S. Army first brought the Huey to Vietnam in 1962, it came as a simple utility helicopter with no armor and little protection, made mainly for medical rescue and troop transport in what leaders thought would be a small advisory mission. The UH-1 name meant helicopter utility. Crews soon called it Huey, and that name stayed. The first Hueys had no special door guns, so crews used whatever weapons they had, M1 carbines, M114s, or M16 rifles held out the open doors by soldiers trying to fight back. The idea of having a real door gunner started only because it was truly needed, not because anyone planned it. As helicopter insertions into contested landing zones became routine, crews found they needed suppressive fire during the most dangerous part of the flight. Those last 30 seconds of descent when the helicopter slowed, steadied, and hovered 3 feet above the ground while troops jumped out were the riskiest. By 1963, the M60 7.62mm machine gun became standard on both sides of the Huey. The M60 weighed 24 pounds unloaded. Add the ammo, and a door gunner handled over 200 pounds of weapon system. The gun could fire up to 700 rounds per minute. In practice, gunners fired short, controlled bursts to save ammo while still giving suppressive fire. At first, the weapon was mounted on a pentel, a swiveling post that gave only a small range of motion. As the war went on, crews switched to bungee cords hung from the cabin ceiling. The cords held the weight and let the gunner move more. The change looked like an improvement. More movement meant better coverage, and better coverage meant more effective suppressive fire, but it also meant more risk. It forced the door gunner to lean farther out of the aircraft to shoot. It meant more exposure and more chance of being hit. The very change that made them more effective also made them easier to kill. Warrant Officer John Masaki went to Vietnam in 1968. He joined a UH-1C gunship unit and finished door gunner and crew chief school in the United States, where he learned how to keep the helicopter working and how to use the M60. But none of that training matched the real combat. In a later interview, he told about his first combat insertion. The noise made talking impossible. The rotor vibration, the engine roar, and the wind screaming through the open cabin all overwhelmed them. Then the aircraft commander gave the signal, and they dropped toward the landing zone. The door gunners on both sides opened fire. Masaki squeezed the trigger, and the M60 roared. Spent casings and belt links flew out into a canvas bag attached to the gun so they would not get sucked into the rotor or fall on troops below. He aimed at the tree line and watched his tracers, every fifth round making a red arc toward the jungle. Firing before you see the enemy, firing to keep them down became the rule, and the hard work of the door gunner, to keep the enemy down. They fired because the moment you stop shooting is the moment the enemy gets time to aim. The sound of your own fire is different from the sound of incoming bullets. Your fire has a steady beat and a purpose. Incoming fire snaps past in random chaos. Masaki heard rounds snap by his head, and he saw the aluminum skin of the helicopter get hole punched. One round came up through the floor and missed him by inches. Later he learned that round hit the Bible of the soldier next to him. The helicopter finished the insertion and climbed out. Masaki checked himself and had no wounds. But the day was far from over. They flew 12 more insertions that day. The idea of a hot landing zone is what defined a door gunner. A hot LZ means the enemy is shooting at helicopters as they land. The area would get an artillery prep first, pounding it with heavy explosive shells. Then the gunships would do rocket runs, firing 70mm rockets and minigun bursts. After that, the slicks, the troop-carrying Hueys, would come in formation, 8 to 10 helicopters carrying 60 to 80 soldiers in all. The door gunners on the slicks opened fire as they came down, trying to suppress any enemy positions. In theory, all that prep lowered the risk, but in practice, the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong learned to wait. They dug fighting holes with overhead cover. They put soldiers in hidden spots with clear shots into the landing zone. They learned the helicopter approach paths, and most importantly, they learned to aim their fire at the helicopter, not the men on the ground. If you bring down a helicopter, you get a crashed aircraft and probably wounded crew. That wreck is a prize to capture or destroy. It also forces other helicopters to try rescue and makes more targets. Specialist 4 Thomas Peña flew as co-pilot on Chalk 2 during an insertion near the Cambodian border. The flight leader called the landing zone clear and said there was no enemy fire. Chalk 1 landed safely, then Chalk 2 started to move in, but suddenly, the tree line exploded with noise. AK-47 fire made its sharp cracking sound. RPG-7 rockets whooshed past, trailing white smoke, and heavy machine gun fire opened up, probably from a 12.7mm DSK, the big weapon Americans called a 51 caliber. The door gunner on Peña's helicopter fired back right away, and the crew chief on the other side did too. But an RPG shot came straight at them. It missed by only a few feet and exploded in the trees nearby. Small bullets tore through the thin aluminum skin of the Huey. The helicopter had almost no armor. The pilots had armored seats, but only because earlier missions had shown how badly they needed them. The door gunners had no real protection. They wore flak vests made to stop flying metal, not rifle bullets. Some also wore ceramic body armor plates called chicken plates. They weighed about 22 pounds and were shaped to fit the chest, but they only covered the main organs. The arms, legs, and head were still exposed. Peña's helicopter was hit many times. He heard the clear sound of bullets punching through the metal and felt the shudder when the hydraulic lines were cut. The aircraft commander fought the controls as the Huey dropped. They crashed short of the landing zone. Peña lived, though he was hurt, but the door gunner did not make it. An AK-47 bullet hit him in the head during the descent. He was 19 years old and had been in the country for only 3 months. The danger of being exposed explained why so many door gunners died. Think about the physics. A helicopter coming into land moves at 10 to 15 knots, about 12 to 17 miles per hour, and drops 300 to 500 feet each minute. At that slow speed and drop, the helicopter is a steady, easy target for enemy fire. The door gunner standing in the open doorway or sitting on the edge of the floor makes a perfect clear shape against the bright sky. He cannot hide. He cannot move around to dodge bullets. He can only keep shooting and hope the steady fire keeps the enemy heads down long enough to finish the landing. The M60 machine gun itself made things even more dangerous. To hit targets right, the gunner had to lean out of the helicopter, stretch the weapon forward, and follow moving targets as the helicopter shifted. This meant he had to move all the time, adjust all the time, and stay exposed all the time. Veterans said it felt like standing in a shooting gallery, except the targets were shooting back. The gun also had problems. The M60 often jammed in Vietnam's hot, wet air. The rotating bolt could stick or the extractor could break. The latch that held the barrel, a small swiveling lever, could catch on gear and make the barrel fall off during flight. When the gun jammed, the gunner had to fix it right away. That meant taking eyes off the enemy, taking hands off the weapon, and trying to clear the jam while bullets still flew. Warrant Officer Ron Timberlake led Chalk 6 in the same mission where Peña went down. Timberlake heard on the radio that Chalk 2 had crashed. He heard the flight leader call off the rest of the insertions, but Timberlake saw wounded Americans on the ground. He made a brave choice that later earned him the Silver Star. He turned Chalk 6 back toward the landing zone. This time, his approach came 90 degrees off the planned path, flying straight toward the enemy soldiers shooting from the tree line. His door gunners opened fire as they came down. The M60s thundered as they tried to suppress many enemy positions at once. RPG rockets whooshed by, and small arms fire punched holes through the helicopter. The gunners kept firing, kept leaning out, kept doing their job. Chalk 6 landed, and 10 wounded Americans rushed aboard. The North Vietnamese poured fire on the stopped helicopter. 30 seconds felt like 30 minutes. Then, finally, full of wounded, Timberlake pulled the Huey up. Both door gunners had been hit, one wounded but still working, and the other killed while on the ground. The helicopter made it back to base, leaking hydraulic fluid and trailing smoke. By late 1963, the deadly math of casualties had become impossible to ignore. Intelligence officers in every helicopter unit kept close track of the numbers. They saw that door gunners were getting killed and hurt even more often than machine gunners on the ground. This seemed strange because ground machine gunners were always top targets. The enemy always tried to hit them first because their weapons were so dangerous. Yet door gunners, who looked like they should be safer inside aircraft, were dying even faster. The reason became clear after careful study. Machine gunners on the ground could hide behind things. They could use the shape of the land to protect themselves. They could move to new spots between fights, and they had other soldiers around them to help and watch their backs. Door gunners had none of that. They flew the same flight paths toward landing zones the enemy already knew. They worked from helicopters that could not stop, could not hide, and could not turn quickly at low height. They were easy to see from far away, standing out as dark shapes against the bright sky. By the middle of 1964, the Army started looking closely at door gunner tactics. They built real training programs in schools, but training could only help a little. The real problem was the mission itself. Helicopters doing combat drops had to fly low, had to fly slow, and had to hover right near the landing area. These steps made them easy targets, and no training could fix that. Captain Robert Sholey led a rifle company during missions in the Central Highlands, and he worked closely with helicopter crews, so he knew their limits. In an interview after the war, he said what he saw from the ground was unforgettable. The helicopters came in together in lines. The door gunners were clearly visible in the open doors, holding their guns out. As the helicopters dropped, you could see the gunners leaning out and firing, trying to protect from every direction. Then the aircraft would land or hover, and the soldiers would jump out. In those last few seconds, the door gunners were the only thing standing between his men and heavy enemy fire. They took the hits. They drew the bullets. They died doing it. But they saved his soldiers long enough to get them safely on the ground. The heavy weapon load made staying alive even harder. Door gunners usually carried about 1,000 rounds of 7.62 millimeter ammunition, and sometimes even more. The long belts of ammo hung from the cabin ceiling or sat in metal cans bolted to the floor. That ammo itself was dangerous. A tracer or fire round hitting the stored bullets could set off the whole pile in one huge blast. Several helicopters were lost exactly that way. Enemy shots pierced the cabin, hit the ammo, and the explosion tore the aircraft apart. Door gunners had no way to stop RPGs. They could see the rocket coming and watch its smoke trail, but they couldn't move fast enough to dodge it. The helicopter would either get hit or not. It was luck, not skill, that decided who lived. By 1966, more than 11,800 helicopters of all kinds had served in Vietnam. About 5,000 of them were destroyed, almost all by enemy fire. That meant around 42% of every helicopter sent there was shot down or too damaged to fix. For crew members, that turned into simple math. If you flew enough missions, you would be shot down. The only question was whether you lived through the crash and what came after. Door gunner Michael Holman from the 281st Assault Helicopter Company talked about what a normal mission looked like. 15 Hueys would head into the AA Valley, a dangerous place near the Laotian border. Only 6 or 7 would come back. The rest would be shot down or so torn up they had to land somewhere else for quick repairs. One time he was flying when the engine quit in midair. The pilot somehow landed safely in what Holman called the middle of nowhere. They waited for rescue totally open, while friendly troops rushed to reach them before the enemy did. Living with that kind of danger every day caused what doctors later called combat stress reaction. Door gunners flew many missions each day, usually 4 to 6, and sometimes even more during big operations. Each one lasted from 30 minutes to 2 hours and could mean fighting the whole time. They flew morning insertions, afternoon supply runs, and evening extractions. The same pattern went on every day for a full-year tour. There was no safe area for door gunners. Every flight might be their last. The tight space of combat helicopter made the losses even harder to handle. In ground fighting, soldiers often never saw when a buddy was hit, but in a helicopter, everyone did. The crew shared a space only about 10 feet by 6 feet wide. When a door gunner was hit, everyone saw it, heard it, and felt it. The crew chief sitting across had to watch him die. The pilots heard the bullet strike. The soldiers riding inside witnessed it all. There was nowhere to turn, no chance to look away, and no time to recover before the next mission started. The crew chiefs carried an even heavier weight. They had to keep the helicopters running and also serve as door gunners. This double duty meant they knew every single part of the aircraft. They knew where the hydraulic lines ran, where the fuel tanks were placed, which parts had armor and which did not. That knowledge made their fear sharper. They knew exactly how easy it was to die. They knew a single AK-47 round hitting the wrong spot could bring the Huey down. They knew the thin aluminum shell gave no real protection. They knew every mission could end with one unlucky shot. The famous LZ Rayx battle in the Ia Drang campaign in November 1965 showed just how deadly it could be for door gunners. The 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment made combat landings into a small open area at the base of Chu Pong Mountain. Intelligence said North Vietnamese troops were nearby. The first group landed safely, but then the enemy hit back hard. 3 full North Vietnamese regiments, about 3,000 soldiers, were waiting in dug-in positions. The helicopters kept flying into the landing zone all day long, 16 Hueys per wave, flying the 34-mile round trip to bring in more soldiers. Each trip came under heavier and heavier fire. Door gunners saw North Vietnamese troops moving in the tall elephant grass. They saw muzzle flashes everywhere and fired back while bullets ripped through their helicopter. Captain Ed Freeman flew 14 trips into LZ Ray that first day. Major Bruce Crandall flew 22 trips. Both were flying unarmed medical Hueys marked with red crosses on the front. The Geneva Convention said they could not carry weapons, so their door gunners had only pistols. They couldn't shoot back or defend themselves. They just sat in the open doors praying the bullets missed. Freeman said years later, they were eating helicopters alive. I took over 50 bullet holes in my helicopter. The shooting got so bad that flights into the landing zone had to be stopped several times. Helicopters had to be swapped out because of battle damage. Door gunners kept getting hurt or killed, and new volunteers from other crews took their places. The only thing keeping the medical evacuations going was the steady stream of gunfire from door gunners on the armed helicopters. Without that covering fire, the whole mission would have failed. The cost was terrible. By the end of the 4-day battle, 79 Americans were dead at LZ Ray, and 121 were wounded. Helicopter losses and damage were huge. But the door gunners had done their duty. They kept firing and kept their helicopters flying long enough to bring in reinforcements and pull out the wounded. They paid for it with their lives and their blood. The armor problem never really got fixed during the war, even though people tried. Engineers made several kinds of armor kits for the Hueys.
Ceramic plates that could be bolted to the floor, extra armor for the pilot seats, and armored fuel tanks that could take small arms hits. But adding armor added weight, and weight cut down how many troops or supplies a helicopter could carry. A Huey could carry 8 soldiers, or 6 if it had armor. Commanders had to make impossible choices: protect the crew or carry enough troops. Most chose the mission first. Door gunners understood that. They knew getting troops in and getting the wounded out mattered more than keeping the crew safe. They flew knowing one bullet through the cabin could end it all, but they flew anyway. Medical records showed something amazing about helicopter warfare. The average time from being wounded to reaching a hospital in Vietnam was under 1 hour. In World War II and Korea, it took days. Helicopter medevac and dust-off flights saved thousands of soldiers who would have died in earlier wars. But the crews paid the price. Dust-off flights were 3 times more dangerous than other helicopter missions. The crews flew into hot landing zones with no gunship cover and often no door gunners, just pilots, medics, and the desperate hope they could get in and out before being shot down. Major Charles Kelly led a dust-off unit with the call sign Dust-Off 65. On July 1, 1964, he got a call to evacuate wounded soldiers near Vinh Long. The troops were tracked under heavy Viet Cong fire, and the wounded would die if they were not evacuated right away. Kelly decided to fly straight into the active combat zone. His Huey was hit by enemy fire during the approach, but he still landed. The medics and the door gunner loaded the wounded while bullets kept hitting around them. As Kelly lifted off, a round struck him in the chest and killed him instantly. The helicopter crashed and the crew chief managed to call for help before the Viet Cong overran the area. Kelly's last words before being hit were, "When I have your wounded." That line became the medevac motto. It showed exactly what door gunners and helicopter crews believed. The mission came before personal safety. The soldiers on the ground mattered more than the crew in the air. Kelly was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest medal for bravery. His story showed the courage of all door gunners. They flew into deadly situations, knowing they might not survive, but they flew anyway because soldiers needed them. The Huey's design made things even worse for survival. The UH-1 had a big, exposed main rotor and a tail rotor that could be destroyed by a single bullet. If a round hit the tail rotor drive shaft, the helicopter was lost. The engines sat just above and behind the pilots and was easy to hit from below. Bullets through the cabin floor could hit the engine, transmission, or rotor head, and any of those hits could bring the aircraft down. The weakest spot was the chin bubble, the clear plexiglass area under the pilot's feet that covered the pedals. It helped pilots see the ground, but gave zero protection. Rounds coming up from the ground would pass right through the chin bubble and hit the pilots in the legs, groin, or lower body. Many pilots were killed like this. Door gunners sitting farther back in the cabin had a little more protection from that angle, but only a little. The Huey's fuel system was another big danger. It carried fuel in cells under the center of the fuselage. If enemy fire hit those cells, it could cause leaks, or worse, an explosion. Tracer rounds were especially bad, because their burning tips could ignite the fuel vapor and blow up the helicopter. Many helicopters were lost that way. The crews usually got no warning, just a sudden blast, a fireball, and then the aircraft falling from the sky. Door gunners learned to notice small signs that meant big trouble. The sound of the engine changing, the way the helicopter shook, or hydraulic fluid spraying from broken lines. When damage happened, they only had seconds to choose whether to finish the mission or turn back. Most kept going. They completed insertions, rescued the wounded, and stayed firing until the helicopter hit the ground or until they couldn't move anymore. The enemy studied those helicopters carefully and used that knowledge against them. They learned the approach paths, how the Hueys circled before landing, and that they always came from the same direction. They learned that door gunners fired in regular patterns, and they waited until the choppers slowed and were most exposed before attacking. The smartest enemy tactic was crossfire. They set up heavy machine guns on one side, so the gunners had to focus there. Then RPG teams fired from another direction, hitting the helicopter while it turned to dodge. Meanwhile, riflemen shot from a third angle straight at the crew. This triangle of fire was deadly. Door gunners couldn't fight all sides at once, and something always got through. By 1967, the North Vietnamese had real anti-aircraft power, with 23mm ZU-23 cannons, 37mm guns, and even some surface-to-air missiles in certain areas. These weapons made flying helicopters not just dangerous, but almost impossible to survive. The ZU-23 could track a helicopter and fire shells that exploded near the aircraft, and a single hit anywhere could destroy the Huey. Door gunners had no way to stop those guns. They could not beat them with M60 fire, and could only pray the pilots saw the threat soon enough to dodge. The training for door gunners was very short. Soldiers who were crew chiefs went to aircraft maintenance school. But door gunner school lasted only a few weeks. They learned shooting, how the aircraft worked, and basic survival. Then they shipped to Vietnam. No training could copy the real thing. No one could prepare them for the sound of bullets punching through the thin aluminum inches from their heads. No one could prepare them for watching the man across from you get shot in the throat. No training could fix the helpless feeling of being a target with nowhere to hide. Victor Renza arrived in Vietnam as a Specialist 4, assigned to the 4th Infantry Division. He had earned expert marksman on the M60 at Fort Lewis. His company had 8 M60s for about 150 men. Renza was the #1 gun in 2nd Platoon. He trained so much that he could take the M60 apart and put it back together blindfolded. By the time he got to Vietnam, the weapon felt like a part of his body. His instructors told recruits that a machine gunner had 7 seconds of life expectancy from the first shot. This scary number was meant to make them mentally ready, but it also held a darker fact. Machine gunners were top targets. The enemy knew how dangerous the M60 was. They knew that killing the gunner made the rest safer. So they fired at machine gunners first. Door gunners got the same attention, but with more danger. They could not dig in, could not use the land to hide, and could not move after they started shooting. The helicopter kept them locked in place, and they were easy to see from far away. They could not move or hide, and that made them the main target on every helicopter. Kill the door gunners, and the helicopter became easy to bring down. The First Cavalry Division, the first fully air-mobile division in Army history, ran more helicopter combat assaults than any other group. Their missions in the Central Highlands and the A Shau Valley shaped air cavalry tactics and also defined door gunner casualty rates. In some companies, every door gunner spot turned over completely every 6 months. Every single one was either killed, wounded, or sent home. New replacements showed up, got trained by veterans who had been there maybe 3 months. Then those veterans got hit, and the new guys became the old ones. The same pattern kept going. Memorial services became part of normal life. Helicopters went down, crews died. They held services at base camp, then went back to flying. There was no time to feel sad, no time to recover. The missions kept going. The landings kept going, the deaths kept going. Door gunners found ways to cope with fear. They made dark jokes, followed lucky habits, said quick prayers before flights, anything to stay calm in a job built to crush them. Some men volunteered to be door gunners. The Army Aviation Badge required a set number of combat flight hours, and this job filled that fast. Others were picked because their job training included it. Crew chiefs always had to serve as door gunners too. Sometimes infantry soldiers stepped up when a unit ran short of gunners. No matter how they ended up there, the job was the same. Always exposed, always in danger, always on the edge. The link between door gunners and the infantry they carried was unlike any other. Soldiers on the ground deeply respected them. They saw what those gunners did, saw them leaning out, firing while being fired at, saw them fighting even after being hit, saw them die while keeping others alive. That respect went both ways. Door gunners knew the infantrymen were flying into landing zones that could be full of enemy fire. They knew those soldiers would stay and fight on the ground while the helicopter flew off to safety. That shared danger built a bond stronger than normal. Taylor flew an UH-1 Cobra gunship in Vietnam on June 18, 1968. He was covering an extraction mission near Viet Cong. A four-man patrol was trapped, almost out of ammo, and surrounded. The Huey sent to rescue them took heavy fire and had to pull back. Taylor saw it getting worse. He made several rocket and gun runs, firing everything he had, trying to keep the enemy down. When he ran out, he did something no one had ever done before. He landed his Cobra, a two-seat attack helicopter not meant to carry anyone else, in a tiny open spot. The four men climbed onto the rocket pods and skids and held on while Taylor lifted off and flew them to safety. He received the Medal of Honor for it in 2023, 55 years later. His story showed how far helicopter crews would go to save others. It also showed what impossible choices door gunners faced all the time. Taylor could risk his life in a Cobra built for combat with armor and weapons. Door gunners flew in Hueys with almost no protection. They could not circle back or make another pass. They had one chance to land, finish the job, and get out alive. During that short time, they were completely exposed. Safety investigations after helicopter losses showed clear patterns in door gunner deaths. Most were killed by small arms fire to the upper body or head. The ceramic armor protected the chest but left the neck, shoulders, and head open. Helmets could stop shrapnel but not direct rifle shots. The M60 was mounted at chest height, so gunners had their upper bodies fully exposed while firing at targets. Reports showed that door gunners often died still holding their weapons. Their bodies were found with the M60 in position, ammo belts partly used, showing they were still shooting when they were hit. They died doing their job. This happened so often it became a regular note in crash investigation reports. Door gunner killed while giving fire support. The official unit citations told the story in dry military words, but behind them were real human experiences. Specialist John Smith, killed while engaging enemy positions. Specialist David Johnson, wounded but still firing until the evacuation was done. Warrant Officer Michael Williams stayed at his post despite serious injuries to make sure the ground troops got out. The citations and the names and the deaths kept piling up. By 1968, the whole door gunner program was being reviewed. The casualty rates were too high. Units could not keep trained gunners. The training programs could not replace them fast enough. Aviation commanders looked for solutions: better armor, better weapons, better tactics. Some changes were made. The M60E1 had upgrades that made it more reliable. Cobra gunships were introduced, giving heavy fire while protecting crews more. The UH-1H had a stronger engine, letting it carry armor without losing the ability to carry soldiers. But the core problem could not be fixed. Combat assaults always needed helicopters to fly into enemy areas, to slow down and hover, and required door gunners to keep firing to protect the troops. These requirements created a danger that could not be fixed. Better armor helped a little, better tactics helped a little, but nothing could change the basic truth. Door gunners had to put themselves in danger to do their job, and danger meant deaths. The numbers proved it. Over the whole war, about 2,700 non-pilot helicopter crew members were killed. The helicopter fleet flew over 10 million hours. That works out to about 0.27 deaths per 1,000 flight hours. For comparison, infantry soldiers in heavy combat zones averaged about 0.4 deaths per 1,000 patrol hours. But infantry could take cover, use the land, break contact. Door gunners could do none of that. They were locked into a moving target, flying at 100 knots, 1,500 feet up, with nowhere to hide. The veterans who lived carried those experiences for the rest of their lives. John Masaki, the door gunner who arrived in 1968, finished his one-year tour. He flew countless missions, was shot at on most, saw helicopters shot down and crew members die. When he returned to civilian life, he had no useful skills. Being a door gunner did not help him get a normal job. He thought about re-enlisting or becoming a pilot, but chose not to go back to Vietnam. The experience changed him, and he carried it for decades. Reunions of helicopter crews years later showed the lasting effects. Survivors met and talked about missions, landing zones, moments they should have died but survived. They honored the ones who did not return, the door gunners killed in action, the crew chiefs who died at their posts, the pilots shot down while trying impossible rescues. These reunions were not parties, they were memorials, recognitions of sacrifice most Americans never understood. The Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association keeps detailed records of all helicopter operations in Vietnam. Their database lists 7,130 Hueys survived, out of more than 11,000 deployed, meaning 42% were destroyed. The database lists 6,175 total deaths in helicopter missions, 2,222 pilots, 2,747 air crew, and 1,269 passengers. The air crew category included door gunners, crew chiefs, and other non-pilot positions. Door gunners made up most of them. These numbers are in military records and history databases, but they represent real people. 19-year-olds who finished high school and were drafted. 22-year-olds who volunteered because they wanted to fly. 25-year-olds on their second tour because they felt they had to serve. Each number was a person with a family, dreams, and a future that ended in a landing zone in Vietnam. The door gunner position stayed in use through the war, despite the deaths. The mission needed it. Combat assaults needed suppressive fire. Extractions needed covering fire. Medical evacuations needed protection. No other way could do the same job. So young Americans kept volunteering or being assigned. They kept climbing into Hueys. They kept sitting in open doors with machine guns. They kept flying into hot landing zones. They kept dying while doing it. By 1969, tactics had evolved to include hunter-killer teams. Light observation helicopters flew low to draw fire and find enemy positions. Attack helicopters waited high and struck when the enemy fired at the scouts. This reduced door gunner deaths on the observation helicopters because scouts had fewer crew. But the transport Huey still needed door gunners, infantry still needed transport, wounded still needed evacuation. The basic mission never changed. The slow American withdrawal after 1969 reduced helicopter operations. Fewer troops meant fewer combat assaults. The Vietnamization plan, hand in combat to South Vietnamese forces, meant American aviation units flew fewer missions. But missions continued until 1973. American door gunners kept flying and dying, protecting operations many Americans saw as pointless. The last American helicopter to leave Vietnam was a Huey. The famous image of people climbing a ladder to the roof of the CIA station in Saigon to board an evacuation helicopter was actually an Air America civilian flight Huey, not a military aircraft. The building was not the embassy, but an apartment complex, yet the image showed the end. Helicopters, which had shaped American operations in Vietnam, carried Americans out at the very end. The door gunners who served got very little recognition. The Huey itself became famous. Movies and documentaries highlighted the unique sound of its rotor blades. The pilots who flew dangerous missions received medals and honor. The infantry who fought on the ground were recognized as veterans. But door gunners existed in a strange middle place. Not pilots, not infantry, just young Americans sitting in open doors with machine guns trying to keep everyone else alive. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. lists 58,320 names. Among those are the 2,747 air crew members killed in helicopter missions. Their names are carved in black granite alongside infantry soldiers, advisors, pilots, and all others who died. No separate designation marks door gunners. They are simply names. Yet each name represents someone who chose to serve in one of the most dangerous positions in the war. In 2024, 50 years after the war ended, surviving door gunners are in their 70s and 80s. Many attend veterans reunions. Many take part in memorial services. They tell stories of missions from half a century ago with clarity, showing memories never faded. They describe landing zones, firefights, helicopter crashes, friends who died. The stories are not for bragging. They are testimony, witness accounts of experiences younger generations find hard to imagine. The reasons door gunners did not survive Vietnam come down to simple facts: extreme exposure in open doors, minimal protection from enemy fire, high priority targets for enemy forces, aircraft flying predictable patterns at vulnerable speeds and heights, missions forcing them into the most dangerous situations again and again. The combined effect of these factors created casualty rates that would be unacceptable in any modern military. Modern helicopter operations have learned from Vietnam. The UH-80 Black Hawk that replaced the Huey has door guns that fire from cabin windows, not open doors.
The final judgment is not about numbers, tactics, or equipment. It is about human courage. Door gunners knew the danger. Every veteran said they understood how deadly the job was, but they did it anyway. They did it because soldiers on the ground needed them, because wounded men needed to be evacuated, because the mission required it. That understanding, that choice to serve, knowing the likely outcome, defines their service. The door gunners who did not survive Vietnam left families behind. Mothers and fathers received telegrams. Wives became widows. Children grew up without fathers. Brothers and sisters mourned siblings. The deaths affected whole communities, families, and generations. The cost was more than 2,747 names on a memorial. It was the impact on everyone connected to those men. The survivors carry guilt. Survivor's guilt is common among combat veterans. Why did I survive when others died? What made me special? Door gunners who finish their tours remember watching friends die, helicopters crash, and young men bleed in the cabin during extraction flights. They survived through what they called luck, being in the right place, the enemy shooting at someone else. Pure chance. That randomness makes survival hard to process. Memorial services at fire bases in Vietnam followed a set pattern. The fallen soldier's boots, rifle, and helmet were arranged as a battlefield cross. The unit stood in formation, silent in respect. The chaplain read the 23rd Psalm. The first sergeant called roll. Each name answered present until the fallen soldier's name was called. The silence after that name lingered. Then the unit dispersed and returned to their missions. The war continued. Operations continued. Casualties continued. The same pattern repeated at helicopter units. Door gunner killed in action. Memorial service. Replace the door gunner. Continue operations. The individual mattered, but the position mattered more. The mission always came first. This prioritization was essential for military operations, but devastating for those involved. Men were not seen as people. They were replacements, slots to be filled, statistics in reports. Yet the human stories behind the statistics reveal a deeper truth. 19-year-old door gunners wrote letters home describing the beauty of Vietnam's mountains. 22-year-old crew chiefs sent photographs of themselves posing with their helicopters. 25-year-old veterans on second tours knew exactly how dangerous it was, but went anyway. These were not just numbers. These were Americans serving their country in an extremely hazardous role who paid the ultimate price. The question of why door gunners did not survive Vietnam has a clear answer. They were placed in an impossible tactical situation. They were required to operate from open doorways on slow-moving, low-flying aircraft. They had to engage enemies who had time to prepare, had concealment, had weapons specifically effective against helicopters. They were required to do this mission repeatedly, day after day, for a full year. The mathematics of probability ensured high casualties, not because door gunners lacked courage, training, or equipment, but because the mission itself was inherently unsurvivable at the scale and frequency it was conducted. The legacy of Vietnam door gunners continues in military aviation doctrine. Every helicopter crew training program teaches lessons learned from Vietnam. Every tactics manual includes sections on minimizing exposure during insertions and extractions. Every equipment decision weighs protection versus capability. The door gunners of Vietnam paid the tuition for those lessons, and their sacrifice continues to shape modern helicopter operations. Their sacrifice educated generations of aviators who followed. In the final analysis, the door gunners who served in Vietnam represent a very specific kind of courage. Not the courage of charging an enemy position or holding a defensive line, but the courage of strapping into a helicopter knowing that your position makes you a target, knowing that the aircraft will fly into dangerous areas again and again, knowing that your job is to expose yourself to enemy fire so that others can complete their mission. That courage, sustained over a year-long tour through hundreds of missions, deserves recognition and respect that it has rarely received. The memorial at Fort Rucker, Alabama, the home of Army aviation, includes a section dedicated to Vietnam helicopter operations. The memorial lists all aviation units that served, all major options, and all significant battles. Among the names are door gunners, crew chiefs, the men who sat in open doors with machine guns. Their names are there alongside pilots and aircraft commanders. Equal recognition for equal sacrifice. But the truest memorial exists in the hearts of those they saved. The infantry soldiers who got into hot landing zones alive because door gunners suppressed enemy fire. The wounded who survived because door gunners protected the medical evacuation helicopters. The reconnaissance teams extracted from impossible situations because door gunners kept firing until the last second. Those veterans remember. They know what door gunners did. They know the price paid. 50 years after the fall of Saigon, the last door gunners of Vietnam are fading. Age and time claim what enemy fire did not. Soon there will be no living witnesses to those experiences. No one who can describe the sound of an M60 firing in a Huey cabin. No one who remembers the exact fear of descending into a hot landing zone. No one who carries the physical and emotional scars of that service. But the record remains. The casualty reports, the unit histories, the personal letters saved by families, the oral histories collected by researchers. These documents preserve the story. They tell of young Americans who served in one of the most dangerous positions in one of America's longest wars, and they reveal the courage, sacrifice, and human cost behind every name, every mission, and every landing zone. They tell of courage sustained under impossible circumstances. They tell of sacrifice given freely despite knowing the cost. The door gunners of Vietnam did not survive because they were not meant to survive. The tactical situation was designed for effect, not safety. Their mission was suppressive fire at the most vulnerable moment of helicopter flight. Success meant keeping the enemy's heads down long enough for the mission to complete. Their survival was secondary to mission accomplishment. They understood this. They did it anyway. That decision, repeated by thousands of young Americans across 10 years of war, deserves more recognition than it has received. In the end, the story of Vietnam door gunners is not about statistics or casualty rates or tactical analysis. It is about Americans who served when called, who flew dangerous missions because someone had to, who died protecting others in one of war's most exposed positions. Their legacy lives in the soldiers they saved, the missions they completed, and the lessons their sacrifice taught.
They deserve to be remembered not as statistics, but as individuals who gave everything while sitting in an open door with an M60 machine gun firing into the jungle below, knowing that every mission might be their last. That is why door gunners did not survive Vietnam. Not because they lacked courage, not because they lacked skill, but because the mission itself was designed to trade their safety for everyone else's survival. They understood that trade. They accepted it. They paid the price, and history owes them recognition for a sacrifice that too few Americans understand or appreciate.